I only heard the part where you said call to order, and then it like shut out right there for me.
Oh goodness. Okay. Well, I think that leaves you and me to adopt the agenda this morning. So does the agenda suit you? Is this okay?
Yep. Looks good.
Okay. Ms. Davidson, is it okay if we sort of have casual votes like that in a situation where there's not even a person to second other than me?
Yes, you can just adopt it by consensus.
Okay, very good. Just wanted to make sure. Who is that coming in? All right. Well, the first item on our agenda is policy 7240, drug-free and alcohol-free workplace. And I believe that Ms. Cunningham Brown will be the one to walk us through this.
Okay.
Good morning,
Morning, everybody. This is a policy 240, drug-free and alcohol-free workplace. And there's only a minor revision to this particular policy. This policy, there's a revision to section D that aligns to our reporting requirements. And in the highlighted version, you should see the old Orange County version, which sometimes board members are different than the School Board Association's version. So you have the Orange County last version, and then you have the proposed new version with the strikeouts. And again, I'll call your attention to section D. The language aligns to our reporting requirements, and it clarifies circumstances to which if someone is convicted, that we have to report it to certain federal agencies. And that is the gist of that particular policy, the change. I'll pause to see if there are any questions.
I'm wondering, Hillary, if we could, as we go through each of these policies, maybe pull it up on the screen so that we can, and I'm happy to like be the one to do that if you want.
Sure, if that works for you, that's fine.
Unless someone else, I know we'll have like a lot of presenters. I think it's been a while since I've done this on WebEx, but I think I know how.
So are you working on it, Sarah?
Actually, I may not, maybe I don't have the ability to do that.
Who needs to present?
I'm sorry?
Is Ms. Smiley, do you need to present?
Well, I mean, whoever, I think it would be great as we're talking about the policies to have the text changes up on the screen. So I don't know,
I can make you presenter
if anybody's prepared to do that, but.
Give me just a second.
It sounds like he can make you a presenter. If you're comfortable doing that, that would be wonderful.
So Smiley, you're now a presenter, so you can now pass that to whoever needs it.
Okay. So let me see if this would do it. Okay. So like this is that section of D.
7240, yes, we're going to go to section D.
Mm-hmm.
And in red are the proposed changes.
Yep.
Board members, while you're looking at that, I'll note that some of these updates are related to a new federal requirement. The federal government has established a clearinghouse for drug and alcohol violations for CDL holders. And so for our drivers who hold CDLs, we're required to report certain convictions there. And then we can also check when we hire new drivers to see if they have something on the database.
Thank you, that's helpful.
And what Ms. Dubison said was in line with what we brought, the policy that we brought to you that was approved before in a different policy 7241 that talked about the clearinghouse and our requirements under the clearinghouse. This is a strongly recommended change to this particular policy, and I'll pause to see if there are any additional questions with regards to drug-free and alcohol-free workplace policy 7240.
I don't have any questions about the actual changes themselves. More just there's some places here that I see like substitute the appropriate position title as needed and things like that. And I think you said, Ms. Cunningham Brown, that this was our policy, but I see some stuff about this being a sample policy. I don't know if I just want to
No,
make sure that when we bring a version forward, we'll take out those pieces, but the red changes make total sense to me.
Yes, ma'am. Let me explain that to you. The policy, our policy is the other attachment that you have. So
Okay.
the policy incorporates the school board associations, language and all of those different footnotes at the bottom, which will be taken out. And then this would incorporate the change that we were recommended. So you're absolutely correct, Ms. Smiley, that any footnotes or any internal notes would be taken out.
Okay. Okay. And just sharing this, this is the only document that I opened, so I don't know if there is, I mean, if those changes are the changes we're proposing, I'm fine with that. There isn't another supporting attachment that I can see.
Okay, so
Yes, we
there
are.
was two, yeah, there was two attachments in there. There was the, I uploaded the original policy and I uploaded the strike-through policy.
Okay.
I only see the strikeout policy in mine as well, so it must not have uploaded correctly somehow.
Right.
I'm fine with, go ahead.
I will go back in and re-upload the original policy, but yes, the four policies that I'm presenting today all had the strike-through policy and the Orange County policy as attachments.
Okay.
I think as long as it comes to the board for a first reading with all of the changes updated, I'm comfortable with the changes here. How about you, Ms. Smiley?
Yeah, me as well.
Okay.
And maybe we should we like invite, I know this is the first of the like committee meeting that we've had as a new board. So I wonder if we should do any sort of, do the other board members have any questions or anything about how we do this? Or other board members are welcome to make comments during committee meetings and contribute to the discussion, but not voting. So.
And also committee meetings are much more casual than board meetings. So, and especially for sharing content, I may be reading policy or something. So feel free, board members, to just jump in there and contribute to the conversation as you'd like.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Do either of you who I see on my screen have anything to, Ms. Doyle, go ahead.
I was just going to say that I'm fine going ahead. It looks good to me too. It's very reasonable.
Great.
All right. Well, then
All right.
we will.
I don't have, and maybe it's to see how board meeting goes. I've attended some over the years as a citizen, but never like this. And I wanted to know, that's all. So I thank you. I thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm listening.
Of course, very good. Okay, well then with that, I think we have passed this, excuse me, with consensus. So we will move on to the next policy, which is policy 7241, drug and alcohol testing of commercial and non-commercial motor vehicle and equipment operator.
Okay, that's a mouthful, but yes, this was the policy that Eva was mentioning with regards to new requirements for our CDL holders and clearinghouses and reporting any infractions to the federal government. This policy was updated May 18th. And so today I come before you with a minor change. It's in section B, so I see that's pulled up. Added a few points for clarification. The use of alcohol within 8 hours following an accident while operating a commercial vehicle or until undergoing a post-accident alcohol test or whichever occurs first. And the clarification here was because sometimes people don't take the test on the spot. If it's a serious accident, they have to go to the hospital and then to have that drug test administered. So that's the clarification for the drug and alcohol testing of commercial vehicle operators.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly makes
No
sense.
other changes, right? Me as well.
All right, well, unless anyone has else to contribute here, we will pass this on to the full board and move on to policy 7900, resignation.
Okay, policy 7900, as Ms. McKenzie mentioned, is our resignation policy. And I'll pause for a minute and call your attention to a new added section B to this policy.
Okay, section B.
Right, and because we have classified and certified employees, the intent of the policy was to bring distinction between what is required of a classified person and when giving notice to resign, and what's required of a certified person when giving notice to resign. Our certified staff are required to give a 30-day notice, or they could be in jeopardy of losing their license. Our classified staff, on the other, they are encouraged to give a 30-day notice, but they're not required to give a 30-day notice. And so this section addresses the notice period for resignation by classified employees, and the information was previously in section B, but it was really unclear as to who it applied to. So a little cleanup on this one so that we all could be clear what is expected for our classified staff with regards to resignation and what is expected of our certified staff. And I'll pause for questions.
One question I have is, does professional employees, does that mean certified staff? And should we just say
Yes.
certified staff?
Yes, so
It's a-
certified staff would include a profession. The term that DPI uses most often, it's certified and classified. Certified staff would include all of your teachers, your social workers, your principals, your assistant principals, all of cabinet who is licensed. And so that is the term that's typically used.
And is everyone else who's not in that category classified, or are there other categories?
Classified, yes.
So, I mean, I guess I'm curious why we use the language professional employees instead of just saying certified.
And we can change that language too. And I'll pause for a minute and ask Eva if she has any guidance as to.
Yeah, I was just sitting here trying to think of why the school board association would use that. The only thing I can think of is that professional employees may include, administrators, like a finance officer, that aren't certified teachers, but are high-level employees.
Mhm.
But you're right, it isn't defined here as I'm looking through. But it's teachers who have the legal requirement of 30 days notice. And
Sorry, Eva, you were breaking up there. What was that last bit? And
administrators.
administrators. I mean, I guess I had a little bit of a reaction to the idea, there are like professionals among like classified staff roles. And so I know this is like the school board association language. There's sort of a like, if we mean certified, we should just say certified. But then if it's certified plus, maybe we could just, this is not like an urgent thing in any way, but I think if we could consider looking at this language differently.
Teresa,
that
do
could be
you think
helpful.
we could just ask our school board association liaison why they use that and if it's important to keep it?
Okay, you're breaking up, Eva. I didn't hear all.
Maybe we could just bring it forward with the caveat that we will ask the school board association representative why they use that term, and if there's a reason
Okay,
that instead
yes,
Mhm.
I will certainly do that and bring that clarification back.
That sounds good to me. And I personally would be fine if it came before the board with that clarification for a first reading. How do you feel about that, Sarah?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
So that sounds good. So unless anyone else has anything to contribute to this, we will move on to policy 7503, teleworking, which is a new policy proposal. I'm sorry.
Okay, yes.
Sarah?
No, I was just closing some windows and talking to myself.
okay.
I should have muted myself.
Okay. Okay, yes, this is a new policy around teleworking, and I imagine that this particular policy will garner more conversation this morning. The teleworking policy, as you know, grew out of the COVID-19 pandemic. Orange County Schools had a teleworking procedure, which is attached in your information this morning. And HR has worked with Eva and Jonathan and another attorney at the firm, Jason Weber, with regards to looking at this new suggested policy from the School Board Association and looking and comparing it to our procedures, and then being able to come back to policy and identify what changes or nuances between our particular procedure and the policy. And so in the notes, and this is not a required policy, but wanted to, again, I think is really relevant in the space that we're working in today. And so the first part of the notes you have talks about the provisions that would be put into place with regards to the teleworking policy.
Ms. Cunningham-Brown, I'm sorry, which document should I pull up and have us be
I think
looking
you
at
should-
as we're discussing?
Yeah, I think you should work, if you look up the app at the app, maybe the abstract first.
Okay.
And what I do is I work from the abstract and have the policy beside me so that I can compare the abstract overview to the particular sections. And then after we do that, then we can go through and look at the procedure, and I can walk through the differences between the procedure and the policy.
Okay, so let me see. And this is our existing teleworking policy, or are you saying this is a new policy?
Yes, this is a totally new policy.
Okay,
Okay.
all right. I think, let's see.
And you tell me if you have a better way that you would like to get at this.
Yeah, I know usually we do this all on paper, and so you're speaking and we have the policy and we're sort of fluidly moving back and forth here. So we're just figuring this out.
Okay, so again,
Mhm.
this is an optional policy. And it's a policy that would authorize our employees to work from home or other alternate work sites. And again, as I mentioned, the policy grew out of the need to respond to COVID-19 pandemic and working in a remote setting. However, the policy that's before you today, I want to call this to your attention, also allows employees to telework on a permissive basis. So this policy, again, allows for teleworking in emergency situations, but it also allows and provides the guidance for when teleworking could be provided in other situations.
Mr. Schofield, could you please promote Ms. Stevens from the attendee list to the panelist list?
Okay, I'll go through the of this policy, and they're outlined in the abstract. The first is Section A that outlines the definition and terms used in the policy. Section B details the authority of the superintendent to allow employees to telework. Section C addresses teleworking on a permissive basis. And this section details who can approve teleworking and under what circumstances, and provides determination of such arrangements. So in our teleworking procedures, we outlined what the procedures were. We had a authorization document for each employee, and we had a log for each employee to document their teleworking hours. Section D of this new policy explains when employees will and will not be permitted to telework and what is required of employees prior to and during teleworking. Section E addresses how teleworking arrangements will be made. And on this particular section, this is the School Board Association's policy. In your packet, there should be another version of this policy, same policy, but what we are suggesting is some of the language in E be taken out because we already have a sound procedure and policy around Americans with Disabilities Act. So what we're suggesting is some of the language in E, thank you, whoever's doing that, they're good. So this is our kind of twist on the policy, so to speak. And again, the rationale here is that we have a sound American with Disabilities process and thought that it would not be necessary to necessarily include that in this section 2.
So this is a new policy coming from the School Boards Association. That's
yes,
like in line with the general
twist.
Guidance from DPI and everyone.
Yeah. And so now that we've gone through the policy, let's talk about the policy and Orange County's procedure. Okay.
Procedures. Oh, I already have that open. Okay.
Okay. The major difference, as I've indicated before, is in our procedure, the authorization for teleworking was based on COVID in an emergency situation. So the procedures you see before you are based on that emergency provision. The policy would extend beyond the emergency provision to allow permissive use of teleworking in certain circumstances. So that's one major difference. As you know, the superintendent can authorize emergency teleworking and notify the board of such authorization and the rationale. The board, and again, this is in the policy, the board retains the authority to overrule or modify the superintendent's decision. Again, I'm going through some points that I think are very important to know. In the new provision, principals have the authority to allow a school-based employee to engage in temporary episodic telework. The superintendent or designee has the authority to allow temporary episodic teleworking for central office or non-school-based staff. So just going through different categories of employees that this could apply to. The principal is required to notify the superintendent when they allow an employee to telework more than 2 days. Any teleworking arrangements that extend more than 20 consecutive work days or 40 work days in a 12-month period must be reported to the board. So this talks about the reporting requirements in the new policy. And finally, the teachers are only allowed to telework on each work days except in an emergency waived by the superintendent. And those are the comparables with regards to the new policy and how it compares to our teleworking provisions.
So I have just a question on that last point. Because we're in Plan C or Option C or whatever it's called, that I presume would qualify here. So teachers, this policy would not change teachers being able to work from home.
Absolutely.
For an emergency. Okay.
Yes, I do think it's a good.
No, I was going to pause for a minute and ask Ms. Dubison if there's anything that she wanted to, additional comment with regards to these provisions.
Yeah, I do think that it is good to have a policy going forward, even when the emergency is over. We know that now that folks have seen what is possible, we're going to get these requests, that maybe when someone had surgery or something that they might, where they once would have requested leave, they might now request remote working. And so giving supervisors some guidance on how to handle those requests, I think is a helpful thing. And it also, I think the policy also helps to give people a moment to think about when you're wanting to telework, it's not just I'm going to work from home, but you have to think about having a private space, having private confidential storage for your files and that sort of thing.
Thank you for that.
Can I point out another important provision in the policy?
Absolutely.
The expectation of teleworking is that when folks are teleworking, they're actually teleworking and working for Orange County Schools. So I know that came up in my HR director's meeting with regards to very minor situations when a person is, as an example, was working, teleworking, but also doing their second job. And so I think this policy provides clear distinction that the expectation is that when you're teleworking, that you're working on behalf of Orange County Schools. And I wanted to point that out.
Thank you. I think that's an important provision.
And where is that piece in here? Which section, where does it say that?
Let's see.
It looks like number 8, maybe, Sarah.
Yeah.
Sorry, all this scrolling is probably hurting people's eyes.
No, but you're good.
Mhm. Cool.
Well, while she's looking, can I say that I am pleased to see that we have that equipment that is provided should be used for school business.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
because we've been getting emails from parents on their work computers from their companies. So I just wouldn't want, well, anyway.
Can I just ask a process question? And if you all decide to go forward with this morning, when does the get in front of the board?
Usually at the following board meeting, and there's still room for discussions. At first readings, there's plenty of time for us to discuss it, and it's open to come back to the committee if needed.
Okay, my concern is that we have such a stressed work and group of people in the schools right now that a policy like this might be confusing to them, and it's hard for people to say, oh, this is not about today, it's about tomorrow when we're back at school. And I'm just a little bit worried about adding more stress to an already stressed world. I just say that.
Well, I do think that we can present it and put that abstract, a very specific abstract in the agenda so that folks understand the context of the policy if it does move forward.
Yeah,
But
I think
to
that's
your
a
point,
great
yes,
idea.
everyone is very stressed, and we do not want to add to any stress, but in my experience, I have found having clear, good policy can actually reduce stress for everyone.
I totally agree. Guidelines are very important. So it's good to have that. I believe our employees would prefer having guidelines and knowing what to do.
Yes, but to Ms. Hauser's point, which was a good one, we do need to be very clear about what the intention of this is so that nobody gets freaked out, because we definitely don't want to do that.
That's right. We don't want to do that.
No,
There's there's nothing worse than one of those like abstract items that has no explanation around it and
Oh, yeah,
freaks
you're
people
right.
out unnecessarily.
That's right.
My comment's a little bit more urgent than that. I think you're asking people any additional drop we throw on this stressed environment blows it up. So I hear you. Yes, clarity on policy is great. If it doesn't, it's kind of like if it doesn't apply right now, can you wait? That's kind of what I'm hearing from people. So I'm going to shut up. It's your decision.
does anyone have any comments about the policy itself and the content of it before we get to whether it will push through?
I just have a question about whether anything in here, besides that one example of the ADA, if there are any other differences between what we're recommending for Orange County Schools and the School Board Association version.
That was the only difference, Ms. Smiley.
Okay. Actually, I do have another question. And then how different is this than what's in our procedures right now? Are there any differences in this and how we're approaching the emergency situation during COVID?
Very similar to the emergency situation. The major difference is regarding the inclusion of episodic situations and how principals would have the authority to make some of those decisions.
Okay, so sort of additional flexibility to work from home at the school level is really the only.
At the school level, the central office level, based on the situation, then provided parameters how that is to be reported out.
Yep. Yeah, that seems good to me. Thank you.
Yeah, it does sound good.
I agree.
Additional flexibility. That's key.
And a procedure that people can lean on to understand the process.
That's right.
Well, committee, what say you?
I will move that we move this forward to the full board.
I agree. Second.
Well, I'm in favor as well, so we will pass this forward to the full board. Thank you so much, Ms. Cunningham-Brown.
Thank you, everybody.
The next policy on our agenda today is policy 4400, which addresses attendance. And I believe Mr. Johnson and Ms. Vaught will be speaking with us about it.
Good morning, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair. We are bringing before you proposed changes to the existing attendance policy. Similar to the policy changes you have heard from the HR area, we have existing policies that do not completely align with the practices we have had to implement as a result of remote learning and our instructional responses to the COVID-19 pandemic. The changes that are marked actually add the verbiage we have been using in Plan C to our actual board policy. Our existing board policy did not have any language regarding the existence of remote learning days, nor did it address how attendance is captured on those days. So the proposed change for Section A would be to insert a clarification, a delineation between an in-person learning day and a remote learning day. Again, this aligns with the practice we have put in place for Plan C and, of course, Plan B moving forward. It does refer to the two-way communication, either in real time or at a later time with the appointed teacher. it also notes that teachers are subsequently changing attendance based on evidence of engagement or completion of an assignment. That is the new section A, which then moves the existing record keeping requirement and excuse absences sections back to sections B and C. No changes in those sections. They align with the state student accounting guidelines. The remainder of the document in section, what had been section D, had language that stated that students would be suspended for excessive tardies, and listed a series of options that a committee and or principal would make. The proposed changes align with the expectations from the state regarding the sequence of actions that happen at the district level regarding notification of parent and or alerting them of violating the laws regarding truancy. So the proposed changes for section, what is now section E, excessive absence, we're recommending the removal of suspension for up to 2 day suspension for tardies, and actually putting the recommended practices in regards to truancy and formal notification into our policy. Those are the changes outlined after 3 absences, 6 absences, 10 absences, and the latter part still acknowledges the involvement of a committee or team from the school and ultimate authority for the final decision from the principal. Again, these changes do align with the state recommendations, and they also align with our recommendations from Lighting Our Way Forward as well. Questions or comments?
Thank you, Ms. Vaught. Oh, go ahead, Sarah.
I have just 2 things. One is on this page, this thing like after 3 unexcused absences, they'll notify the parents or guardians or custodians that these absences are unlawful. I saw like literally the same verbiage in Wake's version of this policy, so I'm guessing that is like a requirement from the state. My request for implementation, if this is a requirement from the state, is that we recognize my children have certainly had 3 unexcused absences in a year very easily because I have forgotten to send in a doctor's note or whatever. You know, like there are many situations. I think it is important to frame it very differently than this policy actually says. So I know that's common sense, but wanted to say it out loud.
I totally agree with that. Go ahead, Ms. Stevenson.
Yeah, I can give the origin of that. It's true that the statute says you have to notify parents of excessive absences after 3 unexcused, and then after 6, that it may be in violation of the attendance law. I think in practice, you do that through automated phone calls. So I don't believe that it's a really punitive transmission, but usually they have a system that automatically calls the parent. I'm sure
I've received a letter also.
Mm-hmm.
So they are, it is true that is a legal requirement. And at 6, you are required to notify them that they may be in violation of the law and may be prosecuted.
Yeah. Cool. All right. I've gotten a letter before too. That's all right.
Ms. Stevens?
No, I just said, well, I guess we'll have to leave it in there. It does sound rather, the law, a scary thing for me. I wouldn't like that. Actually, that would probably set me off as a parent. But anyway.
Well,
Just-
I will just say that I really appreciate the flexibility of attendance taking that we are offering in the remote learning environment particularly, and hopefully that will cut back on some of the letters and phone calls this year anyway, or in the period of time we're in remote learning, I should say. So yeah, that's my main thing. I'm appreciative of the flexibility. I think that the more flexible we can be in remote learning in terms of taking attendance, the better. We know that little kids have a hard time sitting through lots of hours of Zoom meetings. I hope that we are working with families and students to make sure that we're individualizing solutions that work for them specifically. And I'm grateful for these suggestions that have been brought forward, and also for taking out the suspensions for excessive tardiness, because I don't think, to me, it doesn't make sense to have kids not in class because they haven't been in class. So I'm grateful for that shift.
Yeah. Can I ask one more question about this policy too? It's in this section. And I was getting like the either's and or's here. Like, isn't it one of three statements must be true? Either they complete their daily assignments online or offline, or they're present in instruction, or they have a daily check-in or two-way communication. Like, it says either of these two statements must be true, but then this one is either or. So isn't it just three statements must be true?
Two statements must be true. Let's see.
So I think the idea is that there's two ways you could be kind of present. One is by doing your work, being in class. The other is if you are unable to do that and are working asynchronously, but you communicate with your teacher. So I definitely see what you mean, that because the first one actually has, you can complete your assignments online, or you can complete them offline, or you show up in class. But then the second one is intended for people who, you know, are doing school at night because the parent has work shift work. And so they're doing it in an entirely way. But if you are in touch,
you need to be in touch. Okay, so if I just, okay, because it's for that day. Okay. I mean, I still feel like it's three statements, but if everybody else is fine with it, I'm fine with it staying this way.
the other thing I'll notice when it comes for first read, the board may want to consider waiving second read specifically of this policy, just because it's so time sensitive.
Thank you so much, Ms. Dubison. I was just about, good morning, everyone, to meet the same request, ask if there were any way possible to expedite the approval of this policy revision.
We can certainly bring it forward to the full board. I don't think, you know, this committee can't say for sure that that would happen, but I'm certainly open to it if the board votes it that way. So, Ms. Smiley, what would your ideal?
You know what? It's like a grammar thing. It's like not, I understand we have a lot to talk about today. So I am fine with leaving this as is. If others are, there was something about the logic chain of it that was like bothering me.
So let me ask this, and please staff weigh in once I say this as to whether this describes what's supposed to happen. What if it said one of the following statements must be true, and then there was a space after the first semicolon? So it's one of these statements must be true. They complete their assignments, space. They are present for synchronous instruction, space, or the third one.
Yeah.
I think I would probably prefer that personally.
As a layperson, I think I would find that easier to understand.
is it accurate for our folks who are taking attendance in Power School? Does it still?
It still aligns with the expectations that the number one, the assignments are completed. Number two, they are present in instruction. So that sequence and those outcomes, it still matches with the phrasing you just referred to.
All right, I'll write that down and email it.
Thank you. Ms. Doyle, did you have something you wanted to say?
Well, I was thinking also, it seems like that either that they're present and working on their assignments in a synchronous way, or that if they are offline and working asynchronously, that they have this daily check-in. But how are you just, I like the suggestions that were already made. So I think it is a little confusing as is.
So are we comfortable with the changes Ms. Dubison proposed coming before the board?
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Very good. Thank you so much, Ms. Vaught and Ms. Dubison, for your help with this one, and we'll move that with the suggested changes from Ms. Dubison to the full board.
Thank you so much.
And to waive the second reading, correct?
Yes, we can certainly request a waiver of the second reading. And the next item on our agenda is class recordings, and that will be presented by Dr. Dawson.
Good morning, Chair McKenzie, Vice Chair Stevens, and Superintendent Felder, and all board members and guests present. Thank you so much for this opportunity to bring forth to you recommendations to two policies. As you know, this school year we've started in very different ways than what we're used to, and having to start remotely, we've also had to be mindful of the access that all of our students have to instruction, being that we are remote. And we started out very much saying that all classes needed to be recorded so that they could be made available asynchronously to our students who may not have internet access, or our families who, due to circumstances, are unable to have their students attend class synchronously throughout the day. As we continue to look at that, we noticed, well, we knew that we would have some student privacy matters to review, and in doing so, to have classes recorded and to make them public, it would be in violation of FERPA. Any visual, like facial or audio type of identifying information about the student, in order to make it recorded in public, that would be a violation of FERPA. So we worked with council to see what would be allowed for us to make this possible. And what we found was that there were two particular policies that we have, and that if we did some tweaks to both of them, that we should be able to record classes and make them available to our students. So the main recommendations that we bring to you for your review today is policy 3228, which is the video and audio recording in school classrooms, and policy 4700, which is our student records policy. So our first recommendation would be that we wanted to bring some options for your review and discussion. And for 3228, what we could do is just suspend that policy altogether until we're back in person for teaching and learning, because 3228 deals with the giving permission of recording of students. That's one option, is to suspend it altogether because it's not relevant in our virtual situation. Or we could rewrite and put in language in there that this particular policy at this time does not apply to virtual classes. Or we could put in there, replace language and just add in there that if a teacher intends to create a recording of a class, including one or more students, the teacher must provide advance notice to the parents of students in that class that includes the purpose for the recording and information about how it will be used in a virtual classroom. In a virtual classroom, students should be permitted to turn off their cameras and/or microphones except when participating in class if they do not wish to be recorded. So for instance, I'm now, like I'm speaking, so I'm going to turn my camera on, but when I'm not speaking or responding to the teacher in the class, I would turn my camera on. It should also be noted that this policy is not a school boards association policy, and it is unique to us in Orange County schools, and that the board does have, of course, the option to just delete this policy altogether. And, you know, in the current situation that we're in, it would be considered outdated. So these are the three options that we would like give recommendation feedback on as to which you would prefer and recommend. And in conjunction, what we're saying is that to amend policy 4700, which discusses student records and identifies what are student records. Now, the permission of parent and guardian or eligible student is not required for the release of any information that is designated as directory information by the board. And so with that said, what we would recommend is that the board add to this directory information a statement such as, the board further designates the following as directory information in the context of a board-sponsored online video conferencing platform, a student's name, photograph or pictorial representation, and any audio or video of a student transmitted during a virtual class session. This information may be disclosed upon request in the format of an audio-video recording of the virtual class session only to a student who is currently enrolled in the given course or class that has been recorded. So by this recommendation, what we're asking is for the board to add to the directory information these elements, because then we wouldn't need parent permission to release this information. But the way that we are saying we would release it is only to those students in that class. It would not be open for public viewing. It would be only that recording made available to students that are in that class so that they could have access to it for asynchronous observing of the recording. We are also looking at where that we would store these recordings, and then that would be a district, location where these recordings would be stored, and that there would be an end date. So for instance, if I'm recording a class for this quarter, that it would not live for the remainder of the year, that it would have an end date, say, and this is something where in our procedures we could fine tune and come to an agreement. Is it 2 weeks after the end of the quarter, so that if there's any makeup work that students need to do, that they could go and still have access to it, but that we would set a deadline as to how long these recordings would be made available. And that's something that we can discuss further as to the length of that, but that it's not like we would record these and they would be forever existing. So that's what we're requesting, an amendment to policy 3228 to either suspend or make some tweaks in the language, such as the two options, writing in that it does not apply to virtual classes, or that with parent permission, and then in conjunction adding to the directory information the language there to include audio and video recordings of our students. So that's what we're recommending for your review.
Thank you, Dr. Dawson.
And would it be helpful for me to give a little explanation of what directory information is?
That would be helpful, Ms. Davison.
Sure. So the overall framework we're working with is FERPA, federal privacy law that addresses student records. And one of the things that FERPA says is any record that we're maintaining that has personally identifiable information about a student is confidential. And so that's the concern. If you're videotaping a class, is that if Johnny's talking on the video, is that then a confidential record of Johnny and you can't disclose it later to another student? So, but FERPA has this exception, has a number of exceptions, but one of them is for direct information. Every district has a policy that says certain information is not private. And this is how we, for instance, publish our football rosters and our honor roll and all of that. And so what the staff is proposing is that we add to that, and directory information can be released without permission, but people can opt out. They can fill out a form that says, I don't want even my directory information ever released. And we have those forms, they go out in the handbook each year. But this would allow anything that's in that list of directory information can be disclosed without parent consent. And so, you know, the district and every district is really struggling with this balance here, because certainly there are people who are concerned about privacy aspects of students, you know, who are on these video conferences from their homes. But we also want to be as flexible as possible in offering these asynchronous learning opportunities for students who can't log on at the given time. And to some extent, if we're going to do that, and it was a group class, we have to be able to let students watch videos of other students. So this is sort of the balance that staff are trying to strike. And then there's the separate issue of what do we do with all those videos? And my advice is that what should be in board policy is the definition of what's private and what's not. But that technical details about how many weeks you keep it, where you store it, be in a procedure or a guideline and not in board policy, because that technology changes so quickly. And it's a level of technical detail that I wouldn't recommend be in policy, but I know that the staff are developing guidelines. Because part of it is there's different options depending on if you're using Zoom, Google Classroom, as to how they can be stored. And these are also enormous files. So there's also technical reasons why they can't be kept forever, because these videos will fill up the district's cloud storage. But that's the overall legal background. So there's this request to amend the directory information. And then separately, we have to deal with policy 3228, which is unique to Orange County Schools and was adopted in 2017 to have such a detailed policy on recording of classes. And I'm sure that something had come up that year that prompted it. But it is inconsistent to some extent with the current remote learning environment.
Right. You're right. Something did come up to prompt that.
I have no idea, but
it was at Cedar Ridge.
Ms. Jubison, is it your thought that is it your recommendation that we delete that policy altogether or tweak it? What do you think is the better course of action here?
I would certainly be fine with you deleting it, because at this point, we're in a different world and we will still be providing guidance to staff in different ways. But if there is a desire to keep that for, historical reasons that I wasn't here for, I think also just stating that it doesn't apply to remote learning, address the issue. I guess the question is the requirements that it has that be considered from parents if a teacher record their class, is that onerous even when we return to school? And it might be because if we return, you may still be in a hybrid situation where teachers may be wanting to have recording equipment in an in-person class to share outside. So, one thing you could do is delete it, but, workshop a replacement down the road. Fire.
Thank you, that's helpful. Ms. Stevens, what's your opinion, understanding the historic context of why this policy came about? I think you may be the only one here who has that knowledge. So any guidance you can offer us in terms of that might be helpful, or whether you think that this remote environment lends itself to allowing us to pause it for now.
Well, I believe that we could pause it or delete it. It is a new day, and what occurred then, it's things are different now. So, it is, I remember it being specific to our district, but we really needed it, but it's a new day and we don't need it. So it's up to you, Madam Chair, if we pause it or just delete it, because we don't need it.
Ms. Smiley, do you have thoughts about this?
I mean, I am curious whether if we were to delete it, this portion would be covered somewhere else in our policies. And if not, I am inclined to keep it.
Okay.
But I really did like that language suggestion of what to add in terms of if you want to create a recording of a class, or, we could say it doesn't apply to remote instruction, or we could say this. I'd lean more towards adding this language rather than taking away the policy personally, but I'm curious what others are thinking too.
That's perfectly fine with me. You make a good point about that one section. And do any other board members, Dr. Felder, anyone have any strong feelings about the direction we move?
I don't have any strong feelings. Thank you.
Thanks.
I just, two comments. That I have a kind of a legal question for Eva, and that's, we're in this kind of new process, and there's a lot of things that are going on that are showing up on these recordings that if it was me, I wouldn't want disseminated. And these are parent phone calls, these are indiscretions happening in the home, because just parents don't realize there's a camera and a microphone live in the house, and I don't need to say more, I don't think. So do we have any liability, or if we're disseminating recordings that are violating the privacy, not of the student, but of the home?
Well, I think there's a difference between violating the privacy and capturing something inappropriate. I don't think that by capturing something inappropriate, we violated their privacy. The person in the home made a mistake, and an honest one. So I certainly hope that we would have guidelines for how to handle those sensitively. There's no requirement. I mean, there's no reason a teacher couldn't delete something like that instead of disseminating that. And that's the kind of sort of granular guidance that teachers will need. But I guess the question of whether there's liability for disseminating it, I think if for instance, someone walked by in a class with the camera on and they were nude, I would not recommend that we disseminate that. And I think that can be, obviously, I think any teacher would make that judgment call. I hope so, but that can be part of training.
One thing I do want to just add to this conversation in this context is that all of us are mandatory reporters. So if a teacher or anyone does happen to see something that should be reported, it is an expectation that it will be.
That's right. And certainly anything that captures minors unclothed, we would be deleting.
Oh, yeah, yes. Ms. Doyle.
Well, let me, I know I sounded,
Oh.
Madam Chair, I wanted to tell you, I know I sounded rather cryptic. Well, this situation, we came up with this policy because we had a teacher that was collecting all of the cell phones at the beginning of class and talking about something rather political. And so, that's when we came up with that. So I didn't want to get into to dig up that, but I wanted to let you know the reason this policy occurred is very different from what Dr. Dawson was talking about, because I heard her saying that perhaps we might need to record because some parents might come home later and some students have to do their work at night. So anyway, I just wanted you to know that's how it occurred with the whole business with the cell phones.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Yes.
Ms. Doyle.
My question about a teacher, screening or knowing to delete something, that seems a little bit onerous, just because of how many little windows you can have, and if they happen to not notice something going on in the background of one of the little windows, I don't think it should be the teacher's responsibility to. I just don't know for sure that could be reasonable. Maybe it's more reasonable than it seems to me at a glance, but there could be a lot going on, and they're definitely not going to go rewatch everything. So I just don't. Maybe it's fine if there's a mistake, because that's something a teacher would have time to filter, unless they happen to notice it.
If we recorded it and happened to show it to a student in the class and there was something in the background that the teacher didn't notice on the first while they were teaching, which seems likely they might miss something in a window while they were teaching a class, certainly the teacher wouldn't be held liable for passing along the class that they recorded. Is that fair to say, Ms. Dubison?
I mean, there's generally a standard of reasonableness. So if it's something glaring that any rational person should have noticed, that would be one thing. But
sure,
presumably in this scenario, the teacher didn't notice and nobody else noticed enough to bring it to her attention or his attention. So yeah, in those cases, just once it is brought to your attention, then you take the correct action.
Right. So what do you think, committee? How should we press forward with this one?
Are we taking this like policy by policy, or are we talking about all of this as a whole?
Well, let's start taking it policy by policy.
Right. Okay.
Let's talk about 3228 first.
Okay.
Should we, it seems as though maybe we landed on keeping it and adding the requested amendment to it. Does that sound right to everyone?
Yes.
That's where I am.
Yes, it does.
Great. So we will amend policy 3228 and send that forward to the board. And now on to 4700. What is the pleasure?
So I guess I have a question here. What are all the districts are dealing with this issue too. So like what are other districts doing when I think of directory info like this? I mean, I think this seems like sort of a fine solution. I guess, like, is this what other districts are doing to address this challenge?
Some are. Everyone is wrestling with it because there are pros and cons. The drawback, as you said, is it is a reduction in privacy. And it's just the extent to which our desire to be instructionally flexible and our desire for privacy are somewhat incompatible in this situation.
Yeah.
So I know that many districts are considering this and wrestling with it.
Mhm. Part of what and you addressed this, you know, you talked about the district putting together guidelines for where things are stored and how long they're stored. And that to me feels, if it's in guidelines, I think that's okay. But I do think it's important for us to be transparent about that as well with the public. So I would encourage us in that case to publish those the way that we do some of the procedures for some of the other policies. You know, I think, for example, this could leave it open for teachers to share with students videos via email or something, which then a student would just have a copy on their computer that they could pass around. You know, if teachers are storing them on their local device, that laptop can get stolen. And some of the concerns I think people will have, parents will have, could be mitigated by saying, you know, in order to ensure district oversight and like maximum security, like we're going to store them, teachers are to store these on the Google Drive. And these are the only people who will have access to it. No one should download these videos. Like they will be stored on the learning management system, you know, so like the teacher saves it to the Google Drive and then it goes into the LMS and you can only access it via the LMS, which you have a password for because you are a student, right? And then, and, you know, and we're going to delete the files at, you know, at X point or whatever. So like part of what I just say that to say like the broader question we're dealing with about like, how do we keep this stuff secure and how do we help people understand, like trust the district with these videos of their kids, is, you know, if it's going to go in the guidelines, I think that's okay, but I think we should make those guidelines visible to people and we should develop those very, very quickly. Like I would put them on the same timeline that we put this out as well, ideally, because otherwise we're just partially answering people's questions about it.
So I think oh, go ahead, Ms. Stevenson.
I was just going to say, it is not uncommon in our policies, and you could put here, and I'm looking at the italicized language that is in the Tracy. You could add that the superintendent is directed to develop written guidelines and training, you know, regarding the proper handling of these recordings.
And so where you say, I mean, here's, that's fine. I guess like there have been other things that over time I have thought the district had guidelines around that I don't think were ever written down anywhere that I'm aware of. So, you know, I don't know. I'm curious what other board members thoughts are.
I agree with you, Sarah. I feel like we can amend this and add the language about the superintendent creating the procedures. And then when it comes before the board, you know, attaching the procedure documents so that folks can see that. I think it's really good for us to have transparency in this area also.
Yeah.
Is that kind of along the lines of what you're thinking, Ms. Miley?
I think that could work. Yeah. Yeah.
Other feedback from the board or Dr. Felder?
I fully agree with that recommendation. Not a problem.
Great. Ms. Stevens, does that sound okay to you?
Absolutely, my dear. Absolutely.
Any other comments? Okay, well, it looks like we will make those changes. Is everyone clear on how we're moving forward?
Yes, thank you, Chair McKenzie. Appreciate the board offer your feedback and recommendation.
Great, thank you, Dr. Dawson.
Thank you, Dr. Dawson.
So I'm going to propose that we take a quick 5-minute break because I imagine that the next discussion is going to be more lengthy and no one will want to walk away. So if it's okay with everyone, we will take 5.
Sounds good.
Okay, see you back around 10:20.
I just can't understand. Wait a minute.
Okay. Is everyone back? I don't see anyone's cameras turned on, so I'm not sure if this is just me having an issue or if folks are there. There we go. Great. All right. Well, the next item on our agenda is gender support guidelines. I just want to take a moment to recognize this is a big step for our district and an important protection for our LGBTQ plus students. It's become pretty plain to me in the last 2 years as a board member that this policy is vital to our students. And with the rate of depression and the other challenges that our LGBTQ students face, I really believe that school being a safe zone has the potential to be a life-saving place for our students. So I'm just really appreciative of everyone having this conversation this morning and working through a brand new policy. I think it's equally important to our staff who may identify as LGBTQ, but also to those who feel, who may have felt in the past like the board wouldn't have been supportive around LGBTQ plus issues. I think that we have some challenging history in our district. The King controversy comes to mind. I feel like there is still some room for healing in that area. And I hope this is work that our district is going to be embracing as we continue marching into the future. And I'm glad that the moment is here for us to have this conversation. I want to have a moment for board members to give kind of broad comments about this, and then I think I will turn it over to Ms. Dubison so that she can kind of give us a legal framework and her thoughts around it, and then we can talk about how we want to move through it this morning. So are there any board members who want to speak generally about it? Ms. Smiley? Not hearing you. Weird. Do you want to try to sign out and sign back in? Oh, okay, I hear you, Ms. Stevens.
Can you hear me? Well, let me say while this is coming forward, two things. You know, I can certainly understand and feel the frustration that our staff and students and families are feeling with this technology, because you see, like, we can't hear, and I have difficulty getting on, but anyway, at least we're getting it done. And I'd like to say that thank you for your leadership in bringing this forward so quickly, because I think it's important for our families and students and our district to be aware that we're taking this very seriously. And I thank you for bringing it forward today.
You're welcome.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yay.
Awesome. Okay, that was a quick fix. Good. I missed the beginning of what Ms. Stevens said, but I think I'll just be echoing it and thanking you for bringing this forward. I've gone to a couple. There's an organization in the area called Safe Schools NC, and they. I've gone to a couple of their conferences, and I really strongly recommend them for everybody. They cover a lot of topics, but I know that's one of the places that I think Hillary and I first saw a copy of what Buncombe is doing. And, you know, I have to tell you, you know, the most poignant part of these is they have these student panels where the students it's like Q&A with a panel of students. One of the years there was a student from Orange County Schools on one of those panels. You know, it is, we have a small population of kids who are gender non-binary, but they need some really clear guidelines and support from this district in order to learn. Some of the things in that Supreme Court ruling that came out 2 days ago in the Grimm versus Gloucester case, trans students are 9 times more likely to attempt suicide. And there's something in the 80s, 83%, maybe in like the biggest nationwide study, 83% were likely to be reported having been bullied at school. And then there's a correlation between the students who say they were bullied at school and their grades and their school performance. The share of homeless youth who are LGBTQ, it's, the outcomes are really dire for kids if we don't get it right. And I think we have some evidence that this is just speaking around this is an area that I mentioned in our last discussion where I thought we had some guidelines, because at some point a couple of years ago, I asked, like, what do we do if a trans student, wants to, change their name, or how do we deal with the restrooms and whatever, and was told, oh, we have our staff, our social workers, we know what to do, and they handle each of those cases very individually. And I do think that individually is still important, but I think it is important for us to put things on paper and make them available where families can see them. I think that will be helpful for everybody. So.
Ms. Doyle?
I just also wanted to echo that I'm so glad that we're doing this and doing this now. Another group that does training is Equality Agency, and I hope we can all get some training. And the number that has stayed in my mind since I first did training with them was youth who have their chosen names and pronouns respected have 71% fewer symptoms of severe depression. And just some of the simple things that we can support. This is something where I think policy just would add so much clarity and make schools such a safer place for all students where they can function and focus on school.
Thank you, and Ms. Smiley, for sharing some statistics that really speak to the importance of getting this down on paper and making sure that we have some systemic protections for our students. My hope is that we are moving into a space where when families are working through, working with transitioning students, we know that some of our students are transitioning early in elementary school sometimes. And it's my hope that in very quick time, we can become a place where not just we're meeting the requests of parents, but that we are actually a place that can help a family work through some of this. There are some really great tools that are already available, gender support plans that we could have our counseling offices work with families and students on. There's so much work in our district to do in this area. And I hope that this is the beginning of a much larger conversation, but I'm just very appreciative that we're all here at the table and starting to work through our first policy around this. I brought forward this morning Buncombe County Schools gender support guidelines, which are sort of an addendum to their discrimination policy. And I felt like this was a strong starting place for us because these were created from New York City schools policy, and that was created with vast stakeholder feedback from the LGBTQ community and people who are very in touch with these students and their needs. So I think that while we are definitely going to want to still have a conversation around how we get broad stakeholder feedback at the local level, this is a really strong starting place. So with that, I think that I'll ask Ms. Dubison to comment and share whatever she feels like would be good context for starting this discussion, and then we can kind of figure out how we want to move through this policy.
Sure, thank you. And board members, I emailed you a brief update on the Gavin Grimm case, which did just come out. And it follows fairly closely on the heels of the Bostock opinion from the Supreme Court, which had to do with transgender employees. And so when you take those two cases together, what is now clear and what hasn't been clear for a long time is that discrimination based on transgender status is discrimination based on sex. That one necessarily implies the other. And so all of the laws that we have against sex-based discrimination and harassment do protect transgender individuals as well. And in the Bostock, in the employment context, what that means is, for instance, if a male employee is permitted to dress a certain way, then a transgender male employee must be permitted, and frankly, a female employee must be permitted to dress that way. And what we have with the Gavin Grimm case is, again, some clarity that we've been lacking for a long time. First of all, that the restroom issue is over. The courts have spoken very clearly that students are to be allowed to use the restroom of their gender identity. And that doesn't mean that schools, I know that schools do get complaints and people who are concerned about, or cisgender students who are concerned about the privacy implications of that. But what the court has said is those seem to be theoretical, and no one can ever point to any issue that has ever been caused by a transgender individual using the restroom of their gender identity. And in fact, part of what happened in the Grimm case is Gavin was allowed to use that restroom for a while before the public got involved, and there was no incident. The second thing that is somewhat resolved by the Grimm case is the question of student records. Because what was added onto that case after he graduated was his desire to get a transcript with his gender marker as male instead of the original female that had been on there. And it's not a radical change. It's nothing, it does not sort of call into question what we have already been doing, because what the ruling is essentially, if somebody meets the legal criteria for changing their gender marker, then you have to change it. So it wasn't that Gavin was asking his school district to overrule state rules. He got a new birth certificate with his gender marker changed, and they still would not change his records. And so what the court has said is, when he's met the requirements under state law, you have to change them. And in North Carolina, I know we have different, and I sort of have a summary in case it comes up, different rules for what hurdles must be overcome to change different, either your gender marker versus your name. Is it in PowerSchool? PowerSchool is really the one that the district has the least control over. Things like email addresses is a local decision. So it's really just this PowerSchool database where there are some hurdles. And even so, if someone has a birth certificate or a legal name change or a passport issued with their gender marker changed, then we can change that in PowerSchool. And while in North Carolina, getting a birth certificate change does require a surgical, some sort of surgical intervention, you are not required to have surgical intervention to get a new passport gender marker. So that is one way that people address that often. So in looking at the gender support guidelines from Buncombe County, what I focused on was sort of what I consider the legal aspects of it, which is the privacy, the records, the rules for changing records, and the references to discrimination, harassment. And I didn't have any concerns legally speaking on those. There's a lot in these guidelines that isn't legal, but is social and cultural. And so I defer to the really the counseling and student services folks for that part of it, and the other experts. But as far as the guidelines here on how you would handle records, for instance, it's in line with North Carolina law and the regulations that we have right now.
Thank you, that's helpful. So, board, what do you think would be the most helpful way for us to go through this? I mean, it's pretty long, so we could go through it section by section, or we could talk about specific changes that we would want to see. Does anyone have thoughts around that?
No.
Smiley?
I have just a couple of like overarching questions maybe before we do that.
Sure.
Which for Ms. Dubison, which is the decision that just came out this week, does that impact at all like the language that Buncombe uses? Like, would we want to change anything in this because of that decision?
I think you could make the restroom section more explicit. Right now, it says a transgender student may not be required to use a facility that conflicts with their gender identity. I think it could be read to leave open the possibility that they could be required to use a gender neutral or staff restroom, and I think that's no longer the case. So that part I think could be updated. The second part of the rest that talks about schools must provide alternative arrangements for students who requests a need for increased privacy. So that, and I think this is clear, addresses not just transgender students, but cisgender students who, those are your folks who may have a concern about transgender students using the correct restroom. And what the court said in Grimm is if somebody has a privacy concern and they don't want to use the restroom with a transgender individual, then the person who has the complaint can go use the staff restroom. As opposed to
Well, I definitely am personally in favor of making this language as strong as we can, and I appreciate that we have this ruling. If we could only time all of our policy meetings around Supreme Court rulings, that would just be really helpful. Ms. Smiley?
I was just laughing at that comment.
Oh, sorry, I thought you were raising your hand.
No, I wasn't.
So did you have other questions before we start moving through specific?
I had an overarching comment, I'm realizing,
Yes.
which is not a question. I'll say it real fast, which is, something I really liked about this was it does a little bit of education right in it. Like, I think, trans people have been so invisible, like there's growing awareness and understanding, right, about transgender and gender and non-binary people. And I like that this includes like explanation, rationale, and some of the thinking of the board in the document rather than literally just like the strict procedures. So I just like that. Would be in favor of keeping it.
Agreed. Anyone else before we begin? Dr. Felder, is there anything that you want to say before we start talking about specific changes? It's okay if there's not, just wanted to check in. Okay.
Well, Madam Chair, let me say, I have a good feeling about this because there are a number of legal references, because I have an issue with that all the time. As you notice, I said that at the Monday night's meeting. You notice we have a plethora of legal references at the bottom of this policy.
Yep. Dr. Keeling, I see your camera's on. Would you like to speak before we start with specific changes?
I would. First of all, I would like to thank the board for bringing forth these guidelines. I think it is going to be helpful. I think that, when people are thinking about, I don't think people always are thinking to try to discriminate. I think they don't always know what that means and what that looks like. So I think having guidelines that spell out what that means and what that looks like is going to be very helpful. As you go into your deliberation of things to consider, I do want us to also consider the intersectionality of race and gender identity and expression. You mentioned mental health and suicides, and I want us all to be mindful as we spell out these guidelines that students of color or people of color who are also LGBTQ+ have an increased rate of attempting suicide. and a decreased rate of seeking out mental health treatment for that. Also want us to be aware that there is an increase in anti-transgender violence, but that violence the victims of that violence have mainly been Black transgender women. So I do just want us to, as we put together this policy, that whenever we address one act of oppression, we need to make sure that the other groups that are being oppressed that have that intersection are also protected as well. So that would be my biggest thing in terms of us pushing this forward. And you mentioned seeking out voice, and I think that's exactly what we're going to have to do. We're going to have to speak to students and staff of color who have that intersection and find out where their experiences are different. Because, you know, we recently had an incident with someone wearing a Black Lives Matter shirt and having a rainbow. And so this policy might protect the rainbow, but it doesn't protect them from whatever hits they took for wearing the Black Lives Matter. So
was that an incident in our district?
Yes.
I would love to hear about that in closed session next board meeting. Yes, to your point, yes. I agree with everything you said. I think it's so important. I think one of the things we need to do as a board before we, before it goes to the full board, is get that stakeholder feedback and have a conversation around how we want to ask for it. I think that asking school equity teams for their feedback to work through the draft of this and give feedback could be helpful. Principal feedback. Ms. Dubison and I spoke about the possibility of having a draft of this somewhere on our website that we can direct folks to with feedback forms. I want to be really mindful that a lot of people who would like to give feedback about this are not going to want to be on a recorded public meeting with all of the district staff and administration and board members. And I think that it's going to be really important that we hold that close to us as we talk about how we want to get this feedback. I think that reaching out to, I know they're not all called GSAs, but I think that those, student alliances at our middle school and high school level are going to be really important to engage. And I'm hoping, Dr. Keeling, you'll be able to help us with that when we get to that point. Thank you.
Thank you.
Might we also add the Equity Task Force as a group to also give feedback and weigh in?
Absolutely.
Great.
That'd be great. Thank you, Dr. Felder. So, is there anything else broadly that we should touch on before we start kind of moving through specifics? All right. Well, one thing I will note is that I have been in contact with Craig White, who is let me make sure I don't butcher his title, the Safe Schools Coordinator for the Campaign for Southern Equity out of Asheville. And he was one of the main folks working to implement this policy in Buncombe County schools. And he has offered to speak with district staff, with board members, anyone who needs clarity or has questions about how this policy has been implemented or the successfulness of it. So I just want to sort of name that resource. And the few broad strokes that I have that are just sort of throughout the whole policy is that he specifically mentioned that gender nonconforming is not a preferred term anymore. And he recommended us update that in this policy to gender non-binary or just non-binary. And those terms are throughout the policy. So I do want to make sure that we update that. I don't want to talk in too many long of chunks. So I want to open up the floor for anyone else who has thoughts about how we move through this.
Well, that term change sounds good to me. and all of the things you said earlier about getting feedback from people, especially folks most sort of impacted by this policy. So I don't have the the permissions to share. Do we need anything up on the screen, or are we going to just talk through it?
I'm hoping that everyone kind of has it handy. I mean, I have a copy printed out and on a second monitor, so I'm okay without it, but whatever is comfortable for everyone else. I'm hoping the folks who are listening to this conversation, I'm really happy they're here and hope that they have access and assembly to the proposed policy that we are talking about right now. Ms. Doyle?
I have a question from the first page. There's a statement, each principal is responsible for ensuring that all staff are made aware of these guidelines. And I'm just curious if there's a place for volunteers to be included in that list, or if that's not, if that's just too cumbersome or broad, but it did come to mind.
So I think that's a really important point, and I had highlighted that sentence also, mostly because I think we need an entire section dedicated to implementation and the responsibility of our administrators to follow through with this with integrity and fidelity. And I have no doubt that everyone will want to, but just because it's important, because we don't know who may be in these positions in the future. And I always just think about making sure we're writing policy that outlives any particular person or staff member. There's some really strong language in the Charlotte-Mecklenburg policy that talks about professional development, and it says the district will provide periodic training to all school-based administrators and appropriate district level administrators regarding the implementation of rules set forth in this regulation. 2, each principal in OCS, well, I changed that, is required to assure all staff are aware of the rules set forth below and that school level staff training is provided for this purpose. In addition, any plans developed to address particular needs of individual transgender or gender non-binary students should be consistent with these rules. So I think that we should have a whole section on that. And back to your point about volunteers, I do think that we should specifically name that. And one of the places I saw that was on page 2 in the addressing discrimination and harassment section. There's a point that talks about the different ways that gender-based harassment can play out. And it says between between non-employees, including visitors. And I thought right there would be a great place to add volunteers, employees, or students, so that it's really clear that anyone in our buildings pretty much at any time is expecting to, we are requiring to, at the very least, respect the dignity and humanity of every student and staff member in our buildings. So I think that's a really important piece.
Well, I like that suggestion of having a section about implementation and that change that you just mentioned.
That could kind of go down at the, maybe just sort of at the end of the policy. So one question I had for you, Ms. Dubison, was in the sports and physical education section. It says at the very end, participation in competitive athletic activities and contact sports will be resolved on a case-by-case basis. And I wasn't sure if you shed any light on that, whether that's how we have been dealing with this, if there are, you know, the North Carolina High School Athletic Association, I'm sure has some rules established, but then what sort of flexibility do we have, and could give us some insight on how we might want to write policy around that.
So the High School Athletic Association does have rules in place, specifically governing high school athletics. And essentially what happens is, excuse me, a student who wants to participate on the sport of their gender identity makes that request to the High School Athletic Association, submits information to the High School Athletic Association. It's not handled at the school level.
Okay.
And now that govern, middle school athletics, we often will adopt their rules for middle schools just in general because it's easier to be consistent, but middle school athletics are governed at the local level. I think one reason that says case by case basis, there's a couple of things. One, even the Grimm decision did not address locker rooms, which do raise some different issues from restrooms. And the Fourth Circuit noted in Grimm that Gavin just didn't use locker rooms and it was not an issue in his case. And he, in fact, completed online PE and just skipped that issue altogether. But so they do raise different issues, and also our schools have different facilities. In some schools you can just offer someone a more private area to change, but it's just really going to vary school by school. So I think that's the origin of making that case by case, is that these issues of both athletic competition and locker rooms the issues at play vary a lot more from case to case. And of course, when it comes to athletic participation, even at the national and international level, there are often some requirements for the transition to have passed a certain point, which is something that we would not require for restroom use.
So that's helpful insight, and I think probably highlights the importance of using gender support plans in our district, so that when a student has transitioned or is transitioning, we can work through these details in a private setting, get it all figured out so that we are not in danger of outing anyone, and the student and teachers are clear on where students are going to change and how we're going to handle each individual situation, so that there's as much safety and predictability in these students' days as possible.
I'm noticing I don't see Ms. Stevens in the meeting anymore. She dropped.
Don't either. Let me. Oh, you know what? I know what it is. So Ms. Stevens is the president of the North Carolina School Boards Association, and I'm realizing she had an 11 o'clock meeting that she could not miss. So I was aware that she would be dropping off, actually.
Okay. I'm glad she got a chance to discuss this for a while before she went.
Yes, me too.
I do have one other question, which is, it's not a question, it's a thought. I think that we probably need to do some updating of policy 1710 as well. Because right now it says in the opening, the board prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, national origin, sex, disability, or age, and will provide equal access to the Boy Scouts and other designated youth groups as required by law, which is exceedingly specific. And
yes,
but so, and then later on, it prohibits things like bullying according to different characteristics, and that list is much longer, right? Socioeconomic status, gender, disability, like lots of different things. And so it seems like our headline, "We prohibit discrimination on the basis of" list should be inclusive of all of the things we intend.
I agree. I think that is a pretty straightforward change, and I'm wondering if we could just go ahead and bring that forward to the next board meeting. I think
Ms. Dubison. Yeah.
Ms. Dubison?
Yeah, I just wanted to note that I would recommend that, and also policy 7100. And this is something that we had on our list to send to staff for the next policy committee meeting, but you can certainly take it straight if you want to. 7100 is recruitment and selection of personnel. This is our equal employment opportunity policy, and then 1710 is the discrimination, harassment, and bullying. And of course, what the courts are now saying is if it says discrimination based on sex or gender, that includes transgender status. So legally it's there, but that's not obvious to the layperson. And so I agree that adding or gender identity or transgender status to 7100 and 1710 is a good idea. And then I noted that I think, now I can't remember if we already brought, and if Teresa's still in the line, she may be able to updates 7232 as part of the Title IX update. We can.
I don't see her on here.
We can. I can follow up after the meeting, because that is your discrimination, harassment in the workplace policy is another place for us to look. But I know that was getting updated anyway as part of the changes to Title IX, and I apologize, I can't remember where we are in there. But so yes, I agree. You know, with 1710, lists, based on sex and sexual orientation, that we would add transgender stuff.
Well, I would suggest we bring that to the next meeting. Are you okay with that, Sarah?
To the next board meeting?
Yes.
I think so. I think, are there any limitations? So my question is, we have this prohibits discrimination on the basis of statement, and then later we talk about these differentiating characteristics that we prohibit harassment and bullying and things around. Is there anything sort of limiting it? That's a much longer list. And is there anything limiting us from putting all of those things into the prohibits discrimination on the basis of statement from like a legal perspective?
No, you could expand your discrimination statement. I think it's written the way it is to align with protected classes under the law.
Okay.
But
so I think making sure that we're aligned to all of the protected classes under the law makes sense to me as a minimum. And then I think maybe more discussion about should that list be broader or not, and what are the different things to consider there, maybe at a different policy meeting could be.
Okay. Well, why don't we add 1710 to the next policy committee agenda, and then hopefully we will be revisiting the gender support guidelines at that policy meeting also with stakeholder feedback. So hopefully we can bring both of those forward to the board at the same time for a full vote. Does that make sense to everyone?
Might I also and I don't know if it will be necessary, but as I think about policy 1030, our equity policy, I just wonder if, at some point we may want to revisit the discrimination statement there. Maybe it too will need to be expansive and inclusive, or more explicit about exactly who we're speaking of. So I just wanted to throw that out as well.
Thank you, Dr. Felder. We can certainly look at that also. So going back to gender support guidelines, is there anything else we want to specifically touch on? I mean, certainly we need to personalize this policy for Orange County, and all references to other policies that are Buncombe County schools would need to be updated for Orange County school references. Are there any other specific changes that, Ms. Doyle?
I just wanted to mention, I noticed it used the phrase several times. So if I were someone who wanted to change my pronoun, it's if I consistently asserted. It has a phrase like preferred and consistently asserted. So there's language about about almost a little bit of a timeline or a little bit of a consistency. And so I feel like that touches on the gender support plan, like that type of resource. And so I'm just wondering if there's going to be this section on implementation, if we keep language like consistently asserting, you know, a student's desire to change name or pronoun, that refer to the implementation piece of something such as a gender support plan.
I think it would be helpful to probably specifically list our expectations for implementation, like gender support plans. I also think that maybe it would be helpful to just use a language like affirmed names and pronouns, rather than needing to establish some sort of timeline for how long it's been used or something like that. Do you have any thoughts around that, Ms. Stevenson?
I do. I do like the language of consistently. I understand the desire not to place some additional hurdles, but I also am familiar with adolescents to some extent, and certainly rarely, but we do have situations where, you know, kids want to experiment with this and that, and I don't want schools to have to try to ride that roller coaster. And I do like what in the Grimm case, the court noted, I think that he consistently and persistently expressed this gender identity, you know, over a period of time, and that ought to be enough. But so I actually do like the language of consistently asserted, just because the reality of adolescence is that experimentation does happen.
So my gut reaction to that is that we are a educational institute, and while I understand consistency is convenient for our staff members and for comfort levels of some folks, I just want to make sure we're being careful to make decisions that allow for some experimentation, because I feel like maybe this is a safe, I hope we are creating a culture where it can be a safe place to experiment with some of these things. Does anyone else have thoughts around that? I'm not sure I have fully formed my thought, but I have a little bit of a reaction to that. Sarah?
Yeah, I mean, one thought I have is, there are some students who identify as gender fluid, and so it isn't as much a binary as in the Gavin Grimm case. And I think whatever we come to here should address those students as well. And, I think we should also consider what's sort of reasonable in terms of things like record keeping,
Sure.
and some of the things like, joining a sports team. There's something there too, where like some of the things of school are like, you put your, pronoun or preferred name in the system, and the expectation wouldn't be like changing it every day or something like that. But I don't think that's actually what we're talking about. I think there's like just a need to recognize that some kids are gender fluid, identify as gender fluid, and like, how does that sort of fit with what we're doing here?
Yeah,
And maybe this is, I'm sorry, go ahead, Ms. Dewison.
I'm sorry, that we do need to distinguish between the times when we want to provide a safe and supportive atmosphere, which is always, versus how many email addresses we have to create,
Sure.
in a year. And so that's, I think Ms. Smiley is identifying that distinction between the philosophy and the atmosphere that we create versus some of the nuts and bolts of this policy.
And I think maybe that's where, again, I keep coming back to this, but having gender support plans where a staff member has worked through these issues with students and hopefully families will create some consistency and expectations around those things, so that we can work through it. Because I definitely can hold, I think it's an and both sort of thing. we want to provide a safe place and a place where students can work through who they are and their truest selves, and we need to be able to keep records in a reasonable way. So that maybe this is an area that we specifically ask feedback from students and families and teachers, hopefully, and staff members, to see if folks have ideas around that. Ms. Doyle?
I'm sure there are different resources. Gender support plan resource that I've looked at, kind of coupled with what I remember from the Equality NC, is it's not, I guess there would be times where it's like, you know, an end point, like the email change, but I think it also creates that like relationship of, you know, how the student wants to process, you know, go through this process and not necessarily knowing where they want to end up, you know, but I think it, I'm wondering if even like beginning the gender process is, I guess what I'm saying is I don't mean to be pushing an end point, but I do think the communication piece is something to consider. But I don't think the gender support plan has to be something that gets done in a week. It looks like it can be an ongoing conversation for the student with their staff, their trusted staff member.
Ms. Smiley?
Yeah, one thought I have, and I'm not super familiar with gender support plans. I can sort of imagine from context clues what that would be, right? But I wouldn't imagine that we could require students who are gender non-binary to have one or something like that. And so it's complicated. But I do, you know, I think the idea of helping work through student-specific situations and their individual situations makes sense. So I would hope that we would have some kind of a support like that available as part of this.
The one, Ms. Doyle, is it through GLSEN that we reviewed that gender support plan? I can't remember which resource it was from. But
it's on genderspectrum.org.
Genderspectrum.org. It's really thorough, and I definitely don't think it's something that needs to be mandated, but I think because it's a very thorough resource and it could certainly be tailored to Orange County schools and our needs, but just having a framework to help so that we know the right questions to ask rather than parents needing to come armed with requests and resources and answers, you know, having a framework to work through the issues of, you know, who the students' safe advisors are, who they go to if certain scenarios happen, how we deal with substitutes, things like that. So anyway, just it's another thing that we should use as a tool in our toolbox, I think. And I think that's something we should get feedback from our counselors and principals specifically on how they feel like that would work, and you know, how useful it could be.
If I could, I just wanted to mention that Ms. Sharita Cobb, Director of Student Services, has been part of the Gender Spectrum Group for 2 years now, and so perhaps she, you know, could be a resource going forward as well.
That would be great. I'm sorry to say I don't know what the Gender Spectrum Group is. So Ms. Cobb, I think you're on here. Would you be able to share a little bit about that with us?
Good morning. Yes. So the Gender Spectrum Group is it's an organization that works with school districts and families and communities around gender support groups and how to support families, how to support students. Myself, my lead social worker and lead counselor, we've been to some of their trainings when they've had them. We've used some of their paperwork in our workings with some of our families. So we have begun this work, and we have some knowledge of the things that you all are speaking of.
Thank you. That's really helpful. You know, maybe we can all put our heads together about the process for implementation for some of this, and certainly your feedback is very important to us.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. So, group, how do we move from here?
I didn't have any other like specific language changes. I'm curious whether Dr. Felder or other staff do based on, you know, that experience that we've already had with students who are gender non-binary. Anything that this, like a category of thing that this missed addressing that often comes up with our families or anything like that.
Great question, Mrs. Smiley. At the moment, I don't, but I continue to reflect and will throughout this process. I don't know if other staff want to chime in, but I think that what's been recommended thus far will be helpful. But I think, you know, we will continue to process and reflect on the experiences that have been held to date and see what else may be needed to ensure that this is a very strong policy that addresses all of the needs, at least that we currently know. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, Ms. McKenzie.
Oh, go ahead, Dr. Keeling.
No, I was just gonna say that, you know, I think for myself as a heterosexual, I don't want to look at it and think that I've hit all the spots, because I'm sure that there's blind spots that I just don't see in it. So I, again, like being able to take the guidelines and show it to some different groups and having them kind of pick and see, and then I can get that information back to you all.
Can I ask you a specific question, Dr. Keeling, about curriculum? And, you know, we talk a lot about culturally relevant pedagogy and the importance of students seeing themselves in the work that we're studying and that they're studying. And, you know, I know that we had this King versus King issue that I think that you are aware of. And I wonder what sort of books are available in our libraries. What sort of, if there's any curriculum around gender identity, you know, we're really clear that we have to teach these things about racial identities, but I'm not so sure that, you know, I have elementary school students and I don't think that they've ever heard a word about LGBTQ issues in school. And so I'm really wondering about that and wondering if that is also something we need to have in policy.
So that's actually a good question. I'm glad you brought that up, because I did forget about that, because there was a parent that asked for that. And Sharita can also come in because she was involved in that conversation and in that process around books and a process in terms of, at that time, our chief academic officer having a say in what books are being offered, but that for that student whose parent was requesting that there would be books made available in his box that did have characters and storylines that were reflective. But I mean, I will say this kind of like as a general, there is a lot of backlash, pushback to a number of these equity issues that we're bringing forward. Right. And so I think that we do need to figure out a way to make sure that that is available, but also recognizing how do we address the side that comes in and is fighting against, saying, I don't want my child exposed to that. So, yeah, that's like kind of the broad is we need to have this conversation of what we're going to do. And we need to have the conversation of how are we ensuring that it's good and feel safe.
Can you help me understand?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Can you help me understand, Dr. Keeling, how pushback informs our decisions to educate our students about anything? I hear you, And I know that that pushback is real, and I question why it's a factor in the way we educate our students.
As do I. But well, first, let me let Sharita talk about what that process looks like, because the King and King, that was before my time, right? So it was kind of like I heard bits and pieces. I don't even know the whole story of it. So I'll let Sharita speak to that and that process of how we get the books in, and then we can, and I don't even know if we want to have the conversation here in policy, or I'm happy to, around what that pushback feels like, looks like, et cetera.
Okay, thank you.
So as Dr. Keelan stated, there is always room for improvement and growth. And hopefully out of these conversations and this policy, we will see that, right? But what we have done in the past, there are books available in the library, but we are not, as Dr. Keelan stated, those books have to be approved. They were being approved at the time, as I know it, at the district level. And then there were books being made available in classrooms. So children can self-select what books they read or what have you, and are in specific baskets, so that kids feel comfortable seeing things that resemble them in their life, right? So that's where we were with that. And we have continued to try to support our schools in making the right selection so that all kids feel like they fit in, or they see themselves in the books that we have available to them.
So I really appreciate that point, and I'm glad that we are working on getting more books in our libraries about that. But I also have some concerns around, I think that when we talk about student safety, we really have to consider that educating all of our students about those issues is an important safety factor for those students. So while I want them to have resources where they can see themselves, I also feel like it's really important for cisgender students to understand that there is humanity in the same person and another transgender student in their classroom. And if we're not having those lessons in elementary school, then it just seems like it compounds the issues as we move forward. So I just kind of want to speak these things out into the room, and to say that I never want pushback about others' humanity to inform the way that we educate our students. And I recognize that it's a reality and a challenge that, is worthy of conversation. And how do we move through that anyway? So I'm interested in putting that on paper as a board.
And I would say that I had a number of staff in Orange County Schools who was 100% behind equity and doing this work for all the different student groups. And when I say pushback, what I mean is that on social media, there's a number of very ugly things that are being said, and it's intimidating for people. It's emails that will come to their principals. It is threats to go to the board. And I think there's some historical context here, some culture around if I go to the board, then you could lose your job. I don't know everything around the King, but I think that, I don't know if that person was terminated, but I think that they felt pushed. And staff is well aware of that, right? That we're still talking.
Yeah.
It's still fresh in their minds. And so while they are really wanting to get behind this work, they're also very cautious because of how that comes in. And so I think, like, as a board, I'm very happy that we're having these conversations, because part of what they do is they look to the board to see, what are you all going to say? Because if you're going to say it, then we know we can do it. Because then if they threaten to go to the board, we know that the board is like, no, we're behind this work. Definitely having these conversations and us continuing to do this. But that's what I mean, what that pushback looks like. It's not that they don't want to do it. It is that, am I going to lose my job behind this? Am I going to get these acts of aggression towards me if I do this? So.
Thank you for that context. And that's my impression of sort of the landscape that we're working in here right now also. And one of the reasons I think it's really so critical as a board that we are having these conversations and that we are saying these things out loud. And, you know, when I speak about pushback, it's not because I think you are reacting that way. It's just that I feel like we have to speak these truths so that we can unpack them and work through them and figure out what our staff needs to feel safe. You know, I am one board member, but I am really clear that if our staff are defending the dignity and humanity of our students, I will have your back every single time. So I just think that these policies are so critical, and I'm just still really grateful we're having this conversation today. It's been a really long time coming, and could not be more pleased that we are working through this. Ms. Doyle.
I don't want to digress, but I always think of one of the younger elementary grade teachers. This was 7 years ago when one of my kids was in this class, and just from the very beginning of the year, the teacher just asserting a full embrace of the varied families, including, you know, a family with 2 mommies. And she just did it so well. There are some teachers who do this so well, and I was so impressed. So I feel like I always wondered how much is individual, but we do have some great examples of teachers who have been able to demonstrate full support for students and families. And I look forward to how we can draw on some of that.
I think that's a really good point, Ms. Doyle. And I definitely, in the things that I've said, don't want anyone to misinterpret that. I think that most people in this district are fully on board with supporting all of our students, and are really fantastic examples of support. And I feel a responsibility as a board member, as I know you do, to make sure we are explicit in our support so that everyone knows how to move forward.
Yeah.
So
that.
in thinking about how we want to move forward with this, you know, my thought would be that Ms. Dubison and maybe I work together to analyze a first draft, complete with some of the changes and ideas that we have spoken about here, and that Dr. Felder and the board have a chance to see that and make sure everyone feels that it captured the work that we did here today. And then we disseminate it to groups for feedback. And so I'd like to have a little bit of a discussion, if everyone's good with that sort of idea, have a discussion about how we want to elicit that feedback so that we can, my hope would be we can come back with the feedback and a first draft at our September policy meeting. Thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, one overarching thought about the feedback is I don't think we need general feedback about whether or not we should do this. Like, to me, the feedback that is most important is feedback from students and families to whom this applies about whether this captures the kinds of questions and needs that they have, as well as feedback from, you know, staff, administration about the sort of like feasibility and, you know, things like that, the like actually executing on the policy. And so I guess I'm wondering, like, what are the best ways to get that feedback, and whether staff have thoughts about that.
Dr. Felder, do you have ideas around the best way to go about this once we have a first draft?
So thinking about from a qualitative, almost research perspective. It's one thing to say, send a survey, but to me, that's limiting because you don't always get the backstory or have a chance to have a discussion to really gain understanding. My first reaction was, is there a way to, and not a focus group even, but maybe just individual outreach, but I don't know who all to reach out to specifically. I know of some certain individuals, but I don't know how big a group that would be or who specifically to reach out to. So that's what I'm grappling with now, is the how, but sensing that just a blanket survey for me probably wouldn't be enough, because I would want to have some dialogue to ensure we get it right. And yeah, so that's just my initial thought.
Dr. Keeling, I saw you pop back on. Do you have some?
I'm sorry.
No, it's good.
Yeah, I'm feeling like I need to reach out to an organization and ask them for some help and guidance around, just like you said, everyone may not feel comfortable, like being part of a whole focus group and being recorded or whatever that is. I would really like to get some guidance. I know UNC has an organization. That's where I did my training through. But if you all know other organizations, and I'll work with Ms. Cobb as well, just because I want to make sure that I'm creating a platform where our LGBTQ plus community feels like they can step in to that space and be able to give us some feedback and feel safe around that. So.
And I think disseminating a copy, a PDF of the first draft of the policy is fine. If there are advisors of our GSAs or counselors or, anyone who has connections with LGBTQ students and faculty members and family members who want to be a part of this, I hope that we are able to share it with those who have interest in participating. So I wonder if, principals and counselors and equity teams are a good place to start. And then you can touch base with that organization, and we can kind of come back together to touch base about if there are other places we want to specifically direct it. Ms. Miley?
Yeah, my only thought here is I don't think we need to make this complicated. Like, there might just be some simple ways of, like, we have this draft, we reach out to GSA advisors and just get it into the hands of people, make available if someone would rather talk through their thoughts on the phone, or, there might just be some low key ways to via social workers or GSA advisors, reach out to people.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think it has to be too complex or heavy of a process. I know that I think that all of the board members and certainly all of the policy committee members are willing to sit down and discuss this with anyone who would prefer it to be a conversation, or open to receiving feedback from, any staff member who has spoken with other people who would like their feedback shared anonymously. I think we're really quite open in how we receive the feedback. I don't want to limit it, but I also don't think we need to make it super complicated, because it's also a policy that I hope is a living document, that as we know better, we do better, and we update, and we'll continue to evolve.
So you just make it open for just public feedback, and if, in ways, if one wants to engage in a conversation, that there are opportunities to do that. Because part of me also thinks that, and I think you made the point that maybe not limiting who can give feedback, just because maybe I don't identify in this way doesn't mean that I don't have feedback. I just think we need to be open to take the good, bad, and the ugly in the feedback, to just sort through it. I also wouldn't want to just limit it to certain groups. So that's another.
Yeah, I think that that's fair, and I'm certainly open to what anyone wants to say about it. Absolutely. Ms. Doyle, did you have a comment?
It's already been addressed. Thanks.
And I'll just say, because I made the suggestion about targeted feedback. I mean, I think feedback from anybody is fine. I think it's the framing in which we ask for the feedback. So we're not asking for opinions about whether or not we should clarify how we make gendered and binary students, how we handle different issues for them. It's not a referendum on that or whether or not we should accommodate them. You know, it's about strengthening and clarifying what we have. And so I think feedback from anybody is fine as long as it's fine with me, as long as we are clear about that that's the conversation we're having, not like, is it okay to be not cisgender,
Right.
you know?
Yeah, or do we even want this policy? But I'm just saying, we're going to get that. People are going to tell us, regardless of how we contextualize. And then I'm just saying, if we're okay with that, which I think we have to be, then that's just it's going to be.
Yep.
Ms. Doyle.
One in terms of the framing of feedback, and in terms of some people maybe either, as was mentioned earlier, not intentionally discriminating, or maybe just being unfamiliar or whatever. Part of the feedback we could solicit possibly could be people, you know, the educational piece that some people might want. Some people might want to be resistant, but would like more information or be educated on the reasons for some of this. I don't know if that's something we'd want to seek. Does that make sense? This is a little bit more like if this change that we're doing, and some people might not, you know, there might be some people who are resistant for various reasons, but there might be some people who just don't understand. Maybe there would be a portion of the community who would like more education, like similar to the education that we have, that some of us have had in trainings or other opportunities about why this is so important. Which I guess, Ms. McKenzie, you've mentioned that, you know, would be something that would happen in a board meeting, right?
Well, I certainly think that when we present this policy to the whole board, it's likely that I would speak for a few minutes about the importance of the policy and why we're bringing it forward. So I think there'll be a small education piece there. I mean, it's certainly not going to be any sort of, it won't fully capture an education around these issues by any stretch of the imagination, but perhaps to your point, we could share some resources at that time about that people could investigate if they have curiosities around it. So that's a really good point. And I think probably the best off the cuff seems like a good way to approach that for the public. So any other thoughts around this? Ms. Dubison, how do you want to move forward with this? I'm not totally sure if this is a situation where you would be putting the policy together and we would be working together. I said that earlier, but then realized maybe that wasn't correct. So if you can sort of help guide me here.
What I can do is take the sample that we have, make it OCS, make the couple of things that we talked about today with the word changing and addressing the restroom issue in light of the Grimm decision, and then send that to you, with the understanding that our staff and other folks who are more in the know will address the other parts of the policy.
Okay, that would be good. Ms. Smiley?
One other thing, the legal references, if there are new cases since they created this that are relevant, so especially the Grimm case, but like the Bostock case, or I don't know how relevant that might be, but maybe putting in the additional legal references if there are places for that.
And that's helpful. Ms. Dubeson, if you could do that and send it to me, I can sort of capture the things that the board talked about. Then I can send it to Dr. Keeling and Ms. Cobb and Dr. Felder and any other staff members who would want to weigh in on the draft. And then we could sort of disseminate it for feedback. Does it seem like a realistic timeline to everyone that we would be able to do that? And how long do you think we need to have it open for feedback? I mean, ideally, I would love to talk about this at the next policy committee meeting on September 25th, but I also want to, I understand that we are in a very busy time and just want to hear your thoughts about that. Maybe Dr. Keeling or Dr. Felder, if you have any thoughts around how long you think it will take to get feedback, or how long you would typically leave something like this open for feedback. Do you have any initial thoughts around that? Do you think it's possible to get this before the next policy committee meeting?
And the next policy committee meeting is
September 25th.
I don't see why not. I mean, it seems reasonable to me. Dr. Keeling, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I was gonna say within the month so that I have time to meet with the groups that I meet with once a month. So yeah.
Okay, so maybe, Ms. Dubeson, if you and I could connect and sort of work out a timeline in terms of, turning it around back to me, then I can turn it back around to staff pretty quickly. You all can take a look at it. The board can sort of have a feel for whether they think the policy committee for whether the draft is ready for feedback, and then we can get it out pretty quickly. Does that seem reasonable? And then we can all sort of connect one-on-one in terms of exact dates and stuff. But we will attempt to have the feedback for discussion at our next policy committee meeting. That sound good? All right, well, I think that we have done miraculous work in 3 hours time, and I am just really appreciative that everyone came prepared and ready for discussion. And unless anyone has anything else this morning, then I think we are ready to adjourn.
I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you to the board for bringing this policy recommendation forward. It's the right thing to do. It's the right time to do it. So thank you.
You're welcome, and thank you for your support. I think it takes all of us being in alignment to really have this work for our students. And I am feeling really hopeful that we have the team in place to really get this out now, and it's exciting. All right, well, do we need to formally vote on this adjournment, or can we just adjourn, Ms. Dubeson? Okay, well then we are adjourned. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you for your hard work.
Thanks all.
Bye.